So we're going to start with the glasses case because we need to get the glue drying on this and then we'll come back to it. So first thing we're going to do is to work on this. Now the glue that you're going to use is either the Leatherweld, the Leathercraft contact cement. You want a strong PVA. It will say on the side if it's not one of ours whether it's suitable for leather, or you could use a contact cement. So what you might want to think about doing is having something underneath to do this with, because what we're going to do is spread glue onto one side, onto the other, both sides, because we want to make sure there's a really good mesh and that as the leather's folding and bending there's nothing coming away and coming loose. So I use these spreaders. If you don't have anything like this handy, then cutting up a bit of yogurt pot and using the edge can be really helpful. Any kind of plastic really. You can use it to scrape, get the leather glue quite thin, and if you get it right up to the edge. Now just before you do that, if you get your template for your glasses, you'll see here that's the main body, and then we've got a facing, and the facing doesn't need to be lined. So what I normally do is to place this over, it will go right up to the edges on these A3, and then just cut a straight line across the top there so that you're not wasting any bits for gluing that you don't need to be gluing, and wasting your glue as well. So if you cut that bit off the top before you glue those two bits together. So the tools we'll need to do this glasses case, you'll need to have handy mallet for setting the rivets and doing your chisel holes, a stone block for riveting there, a poundo board or old magazine or bit of cork or something that you can put on top of your stone block to help your stitches go through. The groover, this is a useful tool, the stitch awl for opening up holes and lining things up, the chisel for making our stitch holes, so for the gluing, taking the two parts, placing them face down, and I've put a cloth down, and just taking care not to get any glue underneath that's going to go transfer onto the front, which is why working with a spreader is better. I'm also going to work from a pot rather than trying to squeeze the glue out, which can then spill. So I'm working from my edges. First you want to be right up to the edges, but with a spreader you can go there without taking it over onto your bit. You'll need to work reasonably fast here to get a good spread over before it gets too dry, especially in if you're doing this and it's winter time and the heating is on. So going over, and you want both sides. You've got glue on both sides, spread evenly and up to the edges. This is where you need to put the two together. So the way we're going to do that is if you get your suede part and just gently fold it over a bit, and then we're going to pop it down, trying to line it up. So taking hold of those two furthest edges, line it up onto the leather. I'm just going to gently lift it up now, and you can take any kind of rounded end implement, but you're just going to maybe use your fingers actually to start with, and you're just going to spread it down little by little so that you've got control over and not getting any creases as you press it down. So you can see I'm just lowering a little bit at a time as I go down, and I'm going to let that last bit drop. Just make sure I've got no glue on my hands and just smooth that down. I'm going to move this out of the way now in case there's any glue left. And then just with the round end, in fact, probably because of the suede nap, I'm just going to use the bone fold a little bit lightly just to press it over and keep the nap. But yeah, any kind of little thing, you can use your fingers for this. It's just to make sure everything is pressed down and in contact. And then finally we're going to do a little bit of a bash just to press those bits together and press out any air bubbles. Now it should give you some reasonable contact already, but it will need to cure off and dry a little bit. So if you just set that to one side for a bit, you can place it underneath something heavy if you want to put it underneath a book to keep it flat. It should stay flat, it shouldn't wrinkle up in any way while it's drying unless you put it too near a heat source. So you want it to dry reasonably naturally and just start to cure off. Generally with glues, they're dry within sort of a couple of hours, but really for full curing they take 24 hours, especially with contact cements. So we're just going to put that away to one side and we'll go to our next project. The leather. We are going to look at just a quick overview of stropping. So stropping is just a way to polish out the burrs that can catch on the blade. We're talking microscopic levels here, and they can cause drag in the leather. So when we come to strop, you want to have it on a hard surface. This is our Identity Store impregnated strop leather, which is available on the website if you don't have one already. And you're going to hold your knife upwards and then tip it down. You want to be at about 22.5 degrees, imagine, so you're not really at much of an angle, and then you're dragging that down and along towards you with reasonably firm pressure. Turn it the other way and drag it away, lifting it up in between each go. And you'll see on there that you've got some black particles, that's those metallic particles being polished out. With stropping, you can also strop your chisels as well. So you can pop those down and give those a good go before you carry on. And you can also strop edge bevelers. So that gives us a start for cutting. Now when we're cutting our leather, you're not going to get through the leather all in one go. You're going to need to take several goes to get through the collagen fibres. So go slow and steady rather than trying to cut and put all your pressure through, which is where the knife can slip and slide away. So if you go ahead and cut out your template piece, your rectangle piece in the brown leather, get that to the right measurements. Measuring up your wrist for the wristband. You'll see on the template there's different shading for different lengths. I've got really small wrists, so I find this mine are really quite tiny, so I'm just going to show you how you can get this right. So you want to have it really so that it comes around and then there's a gap where the buckle will sit, so it's going to sit comfortably, leaving a gap about this much. So what I tend to do is just get the paper, and you can see this one I've already created a fold of where I want it to sit for me. So I'm going to open that back out, and I've got a little fold line that I've popped in there. So I'm just going to press that down, and if I open that up, that's my fold line there. But I want to bring in to get to this so that I've got this end over it. So I'm just going to press it down like kind of accordion style, so that I now have my template the right size. So if I hold that up, I can now measure. I've got my holes for measuring and marking out, so I can just pop a bit of sellotape on there and that's now the size for me. So that's how you would measure up for your wristband. And you can see if I just unconcertina it, I can still use this template but for other people and just find where their right position is. So for me, that's my size. Template, you can see there are 2 circles here. So if you lay that down over the leather and use your awl to make the markings on one end, you'll notice is further in than the other, and that's because the buckle needs to sit, that part of the buckle will sit over that end of the wrist cuff. So when you've got your 4 dots, 8 dots, we're going to punch those out as holes. Now you can use a rotary punch like this. If you're using a rotary punch, they have a softer metal for the anvil, which is made of brass. Now over time that can get lots of indentations in, and it makes it harder for the punch to work through the leather with a neat hole. So what I normally recommend is that you keep your scraps. It's always useful to have a bag of all your scraps, even small pieces. This is where they come in handy. And I put it across the base of the anvil. Now this means when you're punching out, you're going to get a nice clean cut through the leather. So let's just do a demonstration one for you here. So this piece is going on the bottom, and then I'm going to put a little hole in the corner here and clip that through. I've now got a really nice clean easy cut through, no fussing. It's gone through into this one, but it's meant I've got a nice clean clear opening with no jags there. So if you're using this rotary punch, use a little piece of leather underneath the anvil to help you punch through. Alternatively, if you're using the drive punch, which I tend to use a lot more, partly because these ones you're restricted by the jaws as to how many projects you can use, but they are great for belts and straps. So I'm going to pop my piece of leather. I've got my stone and then my poundo block. So general rule of thumb, if you're using a punch, which they tend to be black, or a chisel, anything you're punching through that's sharp, you always want to have your poundo board on. Anything that you're setting, like a press stud or rivet, which is generally silver tools, they then go straight onto the block. And don't get them muddled up, because otherwise you'll really ruin all your nice sharp edges. So position that over the top of the dots that you've made, and a couple of good hits through should give you your holes. And when you've got all your 8 holes in position, you want to be making a slit down between them, a vertical slit. So for this you need to make sure that you don't move too far. So again, go back to the cutting mat so that you can keep everything nice and flat. Line up the ruler and keeping your hands evenly to keep the weight of it, then cut your slit through. Now it's easier to do it when the holes are cut through, because it gives you a guideline of where to start from to pull against, and it stops you going too far. This is a good way to make any kind of slits for things to sit in. So any of the straps, you could also do this for a bag strap and have the bag strap going through. If you wanted to have some extra support on your shoulder, you now know how to make your own. But by punching these holes, you're giving some allowance for the thickness of the leather to go through, as well as creating a stopper to stop the leather tearing off, and just giving it a neater, more attractive appearance. So punch through and get your slit lines in. And you might also want to just curve off your corners. So to curve the corners off, I just took the knife and I took a angle off at 45 degrees here, and then another little snip and another little bit, and it ended up giving me a round corner. Now some of you might have fancy round corner punches, in which case feel free to use those, again remembering to do it onto your block. But it's quite easy to do that and get a kind of nice rounded off look. Next you have a long strip in your pack. We're going to keep this as long as possible because we have to do a turnaround to get the buckle on, and then we can cut it from the other end to make it fit. So what I want you to do with your strip is to find the end, just straighten off one end and then measure 5 centimeters in, and with a biro just make a mark on the leather. Just get mine squared off. Now I'm not sure how much my pen will show, but you can see hopefully a line there, 5 centimeters in. Now this part here we're going to skive off. So if we were to try and fold this back right now, it's going to have a lot to bend around the buckle. It's going to be quite thick when we put these two bits of leather together, and we want to have it looking sleek and slim on the back, particularly when you're making belts with really thick leather. You don't want to have that chunkiness. So what we're going to do for this is to do some skiving off. So this is where we need this blade. Now if you're using this, leather's quite smooth on the back. Some of the leathers you've got in the packs are rough, but if you have come across one that you're using that is smooth like this, it can be a good idea to just get the awl first and just give it a good crisscross just to rough up that surface, and that just helps the beveler pick up the bits. It helps get a purchase. Now don't be worried with this beveler if it looks a bit of a mess to start with. So I'm going to put a close-up video shortly, but you're literally just going to slice bits of it away. And to start with, you just want to keep moving it to just get things to lift up. So I'm just trying to get it started by taking some of this top layer away. So I'm not really pressing and sliding at this point, I'm just literally kind of picking up from the top. So it started to go like that. And once you've got a bit more, you can then push down and slide it. You know, you tend to get bits catching on it. So just take your time, go slowly, work lifting and pushing. So we're just sort of taking slices away, and then once we've got it sort of roughed up a little bit, sorry, I'm going to use my right hand, you can just kind of almost keep rubbing it over and picking bits of it up. Swapping hands, sorry. There we go. Now I've got a fair bit of the leather off there. You can see it's a little bit still not quite even, and I'm getting quite a way down now. So you want to use your fingers and feel on it, and you can see by looking sideways on as well, and try to get that off and get that as level as possible. To even it out, the best thing to do is, this is where your fine grit sandpaper comes in. It's very hard to get this even with even the best will in the world, even with the best knife. You're dealing with leather, which is going to have bits of harder tissues, bits of denser material. So having your bit of sandpaper, you can just rub this over and rub over anything that you can feel with your hand. There's a bit of a bigger lump, a bit of a bigger area. And you may also find that you've got lots of hairs coming off this end here, so you might just want to retrim that end. And then for the next part of this, you're going to need a little bit of water. So the water is just going to allow the leather to fold. So you want to put the water just up to where that line was, and that's going to create our fold over for our buckle. So you're not folding on the line, you're folding just above it, and you're easing that leather. So as the moisture content goes in, you'll see that the leather is bending and giving you a bit of a better bend. So get your skiving done and get your bend put in. So once you have your end folded over and set, we need to put some holes in it ready for the buckle to go in. So on your template, you'll see that there is a long slot and 2 slots for the holes. So I'm going to hold this up because this is one I've done already. You want it to look like that. Now this long slot is going right over where that folds over in half, and the general rule of thumb is that it needs to be as long as the buckle is wide here. So if you're using, in this case, this is a 3/4 inch 19mm buckle, then our slot needs to be 19mm. I've actually cut it to 2 centimeters because that's easier. So again, using the ruler and the scratch awl, mark dots from where you can see your fold is. You should be able to see that curving up. That's going to be your center line, and mark a dot 1 centimeter one side, 1 centimeter to the other, and then 1 centimeter along you're going to mark another dot, another 1 centimeter, another dot, and the same from those ends. Now with those ones that you've marked on that end there, don't punch those out yet, because with leather you're working with different thicknesses. It's always a good idea to put the buckle in first and then check where everything is sitting, because you want it to sit nicely. So we're going to go back to our block and our punch, and either using your strap punch, you're going to punch a hole out either end of the long one, so either end of your fold, and then 1 centimeter and 2 centimeters from that far end there, and get those punched out. So we have here the fold. You can see where that fold is going, so I'm just going to put my finger to there and put my ruler to the center of the fold and the center of the strip, and I'm going to measure from there 1 centimeter and put a dot that side, and the same the other. So let's put that there to there. So I've used my scratch awl to just put 2 marks into the leather. Just going to make them a little bit more obvious so that I can see them. And then I'm going to punch out those holes. So I'm just going to pop that onto the poundo board. Position my punch over the top and punch through. Okay, so I now have these 2 holes either side of that folded bend. So the next thing for making an oblong slot is to take a cut knife, and I'm going to cut from the top of each hole down, so I'm going to end up with like a rounded end slot. So I'm going to use the ruler and position it onto those edges of those circles, and then take my knife. Now do this nice and slowly, and again you're working through those layers, working down until you can hear the change in the cutting mat. And I'm just going to do the other side. Like so. And I'm just going to lift it up and kind of just try and press out and just see where it's catching, and just give it a little bit of a slice. Sometimes it just, when you're getting right near to the hole, it's better to be cautious and do it this way than to overcut. So I should now be able to take out that little piece. I've got a little bit of a catch, and each time, rather than catch and pulling it, I am just going to use the knife to disentangle it so that I don't get any little leather burrs. Get a nice clean cut. So we now have an oblong slot punch ready to set the buckle in. So while I'm here, I'm also going to put in two holes for this end for the rivets to go to. So I'm going to measure and mark 1 centimetre from the end of that hole to there, and then 1 centimetre along. And punch those through. And there is my close-up, ready to put the buckle in place. So to put the buckle in, you need to hold the buckle. You've got a roller, take a good look at it, and you'll see where the prong is sitting over the roller. So this is called a heel bar buckle, so we want the heel bar to the right hand side. And then you're going to feed in your leather, putting the prong through the top hole like so, and then fold through the leather. So if you pull it now, you should have your buckle into that center, and this is where you'll see why you needed to have an long slot, is because you want the prong to be able to have a freedom of movement. Okay, now if you're doing a belt or any other straps, you can rivet or you can stitch down. At this point we're going to rivet. So you'll be able to see from the back where those holes are going through. So what you might want to prefer to do is to get it all nice and tight, get it all in position, and then hold it firm, and then use those holes you've already punched through, push the punch through and punch through to get them in exactly the right place on the other side, and then you'll know it's all going to sit nicely. So get those punched through, and just before we go to do any riveting, we're just going to check that we are the right way around. So just take your finger holding the buckle, just place it, just make sure it looks like it's right. So you should have the buckle with the prong and the roller facing this way with this smooth side here, and not looking like that. It's very easy to put it on wrong when you're trying to think all the different things through, so it's always worth just double checking just before you go to set your rivets. So I've got my couple of rivets here. I'm going to use 2 rivets, and for the moment I'm going to clip this in. What we're going to do with this is we are going to set them, but sometimes if you're doing a belt and you've got a lot more to work with, what can be really nice is to set that rivet here and make a little bit more of a turnover, and set your second rivet further down so that your keeper can sit in there and is fixed in place. We're going to do it so the keeper's movable because it's actually more useful on a wristband, but on a belt particularly it's actually nice to have the keeper fixed in. So before you would set those rivets, you'd allow a little bit more of a space, probably 2 centimeters, and a little bit more of a tail coming back from there, and then you would push your keeper in place, whether it's a metal or a leather one, and then you can set those rivets in place. So to set the rivets, we're going to our block, we're going to pop the anvil down and the rivet setter, and we're going to place the rivets cap down onto the dish and look for the concave end of the setting tool, and that wants to be really upright, really vertical, and you're going to give it 2 or 3 really firm hits. So like that, and you should be able to see that they've gone over nice and neatly. Just have a feel of it. If you think it needs another bit of a hit, give it another hit. Just make sure it's in nice and firmly. And when you're setting rivets, you want to have about 2 millimeters poking up above the top of the leather here for the posts. So we're using the small rivets for this. If you're using it on a belt and you've got quite a lot of layers, it probably will be the medium, but it might even be the large rivet that you'll need depending on how much you've skived back and taken off. So once your rivets are set, I'm going to move that out of the way again. You're now ready to thread everything together. So once your rivets are set, you'll need to make your keeper. So there's a little bit of leather, a little length of this brown leather for you to do that, and here's how to make the keeper. So I have my little keeper made here, and I'm going to now thread it together. So I'm going to take it and look for my wider end here and put the buckle through to fall in there, and just make sure I've caught in the back so that it's gone up nice and tight to the front. Next is going to go on my keeper. Like so, and then I can thread this end through. Now at this point you can remeasure, so to find where you need to start your holes. So if you take the end of the strip through, do it up to where you think is a good point, and then maybe bend it back and make a mark, and then you can undo that. And that is my mark I've made, and from there I'm going to go every 2 centimeters and make a dot and then punch out those holes. So I want to have 3 holes. Generally looks nice and it means other people can wear it. Generally stick to odd numbers, so 3 or 5. However many you're doing will depend on what you're doing. So if you look at most belts, they have either 5 or 7 sometimes on them, depending on the style of the belt. So again, you're making your holes with your poundo board through, or with your rotary punch. Now you want to make sure that the holes are the right size for the prong to go through. So you can see on here we're using quite a small prong, but obviously on some buckles they'll be bigger, in which case your hole needs to be bigger. It needs to be able to go in. Sometimes even on belts you'll see that they have eyelets. I think this one does. So you can see it has eyelets and quite large holes because it's got quite a large buckle. So for that you can just go to the next sizes up. Now what I'd like to do with my rotary punch, you can see hanging off here, is I've actually taken a strip that I keep tied onto it, and I have one of every hole punched out of it. I've also done the same with my mini punch set, and I keep that inside. And the advantage of that is I can now just get my prong and just see which is going to be the nicest hole for it to go through. So looking at this, I'm going to go for hole number 4. So the 4th biggest, if you like, hole. So I'm just going to turn my rotary punch to the 4th biggest, which is that one. And again, I'm going to get my scrap of leather and go through and punch my holes out from those markings that I've made. Again, you can do this with your drive punch or with your mini punch set, whichever you need to do it with. Okay, so I now have my holes in place. And now you can take an end and shape the end. So again, just before you do anything, any more cutting off or anything, just try it on. Make sure it's fitting you and is working Yep, that's lovely. And maybe push it through the keeper just to make sure that you have enough leather there to do that. It's a little bit tricky to do it on yourselves when you're feeling under pressure. Okay, so I think I want to trim mine so that I've got probably a little bit off there. So I'm just going to trim and shape that. I don't want to have this bit flapping out. So you're just literally going to cut in the same way that you did your corners to neaten off, or you could do a shaped end with a triangle shape. And that will give you your wrist cuff. If you wanted to customize it a little bit further, you can add some tooling onto it, which is what I've done with this one here. So this particular leather is bridal leather, the thicker leather. And in order to do that, I wet it and then left it in a plastic bag. I wet it from the back, left it in a plastic bag for an hour, because with bridal leather it's quite hard to stamp into. It needs to really have high humidity. This oil tan brown leather will take a stamp really nicely, or you could do some other designs or put some conchos through. Conchos are decorative detailing, which if you have a look on our website, they either screw in through a hole or they can be riveted in with decorative rivets. So there are different ways that you can customize. A lot of the conchos are themed, so if you like motorbikes, so if you like whatever you might like Celtic or anything, you could put a Celtic kind of motif into it. So it's just a way to customize your wrist cuff. So to set the rivets, we're going to our block, we're going to pop the anvil down and the rivet setter, and we're going to place the rivets cap down onto the dish and look for the concave end of the setting tool, and that wants to be really upright, really vertical, and you're going to give it 2 or 3 really firm hits. This one going. So like that, and you should be able to see that they've gone over nice and neatly. Just have a feel of it. If you think it needs another bit of a hit, give it another hit. Just make sure it's in nice and firmly. And when you're setting rivets, you want to have about 2mm poking up above the top of the leather here for the posts. So we're using the small rivets for this. If you're using it on a belt and you've got quite a lot of layers, it probably will be the medium, but it might even be the large rivet that you'll need, depending on how much you've skived back and taken off. So once your rivets are set, you'll need to make your keeper. So there's a little bit of leather, a little length of this brown leather for you to do that, and here's how to make the keeper. So, making a keeper. You have a piece of leather in your kit, which is this oil tan brown, a little strip, and we're going to work out the keeper. So we've got our belt strap here. So we want to fold this round, and you want to have a piece that goes almost up to that side there. Think of it as thirds if you like, and then over. Pull it nice and tight, and because this is oil tan, when you press it you're going to leave some marks on it. You might just want to, when you're holding it down here and you've got it to the right length, maybe make a little scratch just to show where you're going to cut it, and you want to be coming a little bit inside the top of there, and that's how you work out your length. It's important that you do your keepers when you know you've got these 2 bits here, but you're also, the whole point is that it's going to thread through. So that's why by doing it almost a complete third, it will meet in the middle by the time you get your extra piece to go over. If we just get a piece in place, you'll see what I mean. So we've now got that there, pull that down, and that's meeting in the middle. So it needs to be sort of not snug, but not too tight that you can't get your strap it through it, because that's the whole point of the keeper. So if you fold them down now, get them to overlap in the middle there. Give them a little press to set those creases. And we're going to make a little hole in each end. So it's a hole that we want to be able to stitch through. So you can use your awl or your smallest little hole in your stitch punch set. So it's just that. And then with a piece of length of thread, don't need a very long piece, maybe just about that much thread. Essentially what we want to do is to catch these two bits together, and then they will be sealed up inside the belt loop. So thread the needle and take it double and put a knot in the end. As so. Just make sure it's tight. And then what we're going to do is fold them over. It's a little fiddly, but this is a fairly simple way compared to lots of other ones I've seen. So put the needle through the centre hole, so you're kind of keeping the keeper together. Take it through and then drop it down through that loop that you've made with your knot. And then when you pull that first one tight, you can tuck the knot inside, but you've got kind of a stitch that's pulled those two together. And then if you take the needle through to the other side, you can come back down through the centre again. And put an equivalent stitch in that side. If you want to make it a bit more secure, you can do that once more with either one. I'm just going to go through the centre one more time from the left side. So I have my little keeper made here, and I'm going to now thread it together. So I'm going to take it and look for my wider end here and put the buckle through to fall in there, and just make sure I've caught in the back so that it's gone up nice and tight to the front. Next is going to go on my keeper. Like so, and then I can thread this end through. Now at this point you can remeasure, so to find where you need to start your holes. So if you take the end of the strip through, do it up to where you think is a good point, and then maybe bend it back and make a mark, and then you can undo that. And that is my mark I've made. And from there I'm going to go every 2 centimeters and make a dot and then punch out those holes. So I want to have 3 holes. Generally looks nice and it means other people can wear it. Generally stick to odd numbers, so 3 or 5. However many you're doing will depend on what you're doing. So if you look at most belts, they have either 5 or 7 sometimes on them, depending on the style of the belt. So again, you're making your holes with your poundo board through or with your rotary punch. Now you want to make sure that the holes are the right size for the prong to go through. So you can see on here we're using quite a small prong, but obviously on some buckles they'll be bigger, in which case your hole needs to be bigger. It needs to be able to go in. Sometimes even on belts you'll see that they have eyelets. I think this one does. So you can see it has eyelets and quite large holes because it's got quite a large buckle. So for that you can just go to the next sizes up. Now what I'd like to do with my rotary punch, you can see hanging off here, is I've actually taken a strip that I keep tied onto it and I have one of every hole punched out of it. I've also done the same with my mini punch set, and I keep that inside. And the advantage of that is I can now just get my prong and just see which is going to be the nicest hole for it to go through. So looking at this, I'm going to go for hole number 4. So the fourth biggest, if you like, hole. So I'm just going to turn my rotary punch to the fourth biggest, which is that one. And again, I'm going to get my scrap of leather and go through and punch my holes out from those markings that I've made. Again, you can do this with your drive punch or with your mini punch set, whichever you need to do it with. Okay, so I now have my holes in place. And now you can take an end and shape the end. So again, just before you do anything, any more cutting off or anything, just try it on. Make sure it's fitting you and it's working. Yep, that's lovely. And maybe push it through the keeper just to make sure that you have enough leather there to do that. It's a little bit tricky to do it on yourself when you're feeling under pressure. Okay, so I think I want to trim mine so that I've got probably a little bit off there. So I'm just going to trim and shape that. I don't want to have this bit flapping out. So you're just literally going to cut in the same way that you did your corners to neaten off, or you could do a shaped end with a triangle shape. And that will give you your wrist cuff. If you wanted to customize it a little bit further, you can add some tooling onto it, which is what I've done with this one here. So this particular leather is bridle leather, the thicker leather, and in order to do that I wet it and then left it in a plastic bag. I wet it from the back, left it in a plastic bag for an hour, because with bridle leather it's quite hard to stamp into. It needs to really have high humidity. This oil tan brown leather will take a stamp really nicely, or you could do some other designs or put some conchos through. Conchos are decorative detailing, which if you have a look on our website, they either screw in through a hole or they can be riveted in with decorative rivets. So there are different ways that you can customize. A lot of the conchos are themed, so if you like motorbikes, so if you like whatever you might like Celtic or anything, you could put a Celtic kind of motif into it. So it's just and the size 1 punch, rivet setter, dot anvil, a good knife, and strop your knife. I'll talk about that in just a moment. 2 needles and a scratch awl. Now you will also find it useful to have maybe just a little bit of paper in case any of the glue squishes out from the sides. Your glue, and yeah, it may also be helpful to have a pen to mark out some of the pattern markings as well. So those are the things you'll need to get ready to do this session. The first thing to do is to make sure that your groover is set to 5mm, and when I say 5mm, that's from that metal bar to that hole there. It has a little tiny screwdriver in the end. It's the same sort of screw that you'd use for, when you're doing glasses or little jobs. And it just slightly untighten it, unscrew it, and then just measure it against your ruler. So I tend to use a 5mm seam allowance for everything, and then the chisel we're using will give a length of 5mm from hole to hole, and it just makes a lot of the templates and things that I work on when I'm planning a bit easier to use. You've got your bonded leather and your template, so just position it over. Now it does go right to the edges of the A4. I use the maximum amount, so if it goes slightly over, just get it as positioned as you can, and just make sure everything is looking right on here. Now it can be worth, I'm just going to put a ruler down, and sometimes I like to even add a weight on one side while I'm cutting to stop everything moving. So I'm just going to use this as the weight. Now we do sell these cases, these acrylic templates, kind of hard to see on the screen. Absolutely brilliant for cutting these out. You can go really quickly and get really neat jobs done on it. So if you think this is something that you might want to make lots of for Christmas presents, I do recommend investing in one of these, because you can get nice cut lines and you can work quite quickly on it. But we'll assume you don't have one, and we'll be working from the paper template. So I'm just going to put my ruler up and position it to that, where that first straight line is. So we're going from this bit here. Now, whenever you're cutting and you've got these sort of funny angles and everything, you always want to be cutting away from the main body of what you're doing. So for cutting this part out, we're going to just take a whole straight line going all the way down. So I'm just going to move the ruler right up, and making sure we stop at that bit. So in fact, I'm just going to make sure I've got a quite strong pen mark where that line is, so that I don't go any further. So I'm just going to cut that. And again, you're working through those layers until you can hear the mat when it changes. And I'm just going to tell, yeah, that's great. And then you want to really carefully just be positioning and moving your weights around as you go. So I'm now just going to position my ruler from that pen mark I made coming off of here down to that corner, and just get that angle right. And again, I'm holding the ruler quite firmly so it doesn't slip. You'll notice I'm cutting from this suede side. That's again to stop sliding and cutting, slipping. Now, you quite often will find that when you get to bits like this where you've got a corner, because you haven't wanted to go too far down, you just need to kind of work to get those cuts so that the leather will just come away. So just keep going into those channels you've made, keep going up a little bit, and it should come off with a really neat bit. Now hang on to this bit, because this will be a really good bit to make your nose bridge from. So carry on cutting the rest of it out. You will find that you've got a curve part here, and again, that's where the acrylic templates are really great help. So to cut that, just take your time, going much lighter with the knife, following the template, minding your fingers, keep going lightly through, and you should be able to just work into that leather then as you develop a channel. Okay, if it's a standard curve, then you can use something like a dinner plate or anything that you can find around the house that's going to give you that edge to cut up against. This is kind of a curve that's going like that and flaring out a bit. It's not completely standard curve, so you will need to cut this one as per the template. So just work your way around, cutting out your piece there, and then from the template pack you will also need to cut out a piece for a facing, which will be from the brown piece that you had left behind, the top piece, and you'll also need to keep a bit to trim down for the nose. And I'm always losing my little nose template, my nose holder. But it's basically just a little long strip like that. It looks quite long, but that's because it's going to bend up like that. So get all those bits cut, and then we'll be ready for making up. On the template there are some markings for the nose holder rivets and for the magnet. Make your dots through, and I'm just going to put a dot on the back there so that I know where the magnet's got to go through. So if you go through and then make your with your drive punch, now this will have to be a drive punch rather than the rotary punch because you've going too far in. So go back, punch your rivet holes, and then with a hole on either end punched out as well on your nose keeper, you can now push those through. And because the nose keeper's longer, now you can do it this way up, or you can turn it and have it the suede way up, which is your preference. And we clip those two in place on there, and those are now ready to set. Now with the magnet that's going to go in here, you'll have it in this pack here. So let's take a look at those. They have these little discs. It comes in a protective little case. So if you pull it apart, they're pretty strong, so give it a little tug apart. When the plastic's there, they're less strong. I'm just going to keep the plastic on that to keep it nice. So for the one that's going to be on your bit here, so this is going to be where it closes over here, that curve, so the bottom curve, we're going to do the piece that looks like that one. So the thick piece with the dish in is what's going to go there, and the piece with the nub in is going to go on the facing. Now in order to get these in, you've got that marking on the back here for your center, and if you go back to these little discs, you'll see a circle and then two lines. If you use that to position over that dot that you made, find the dot and make that in the center of that circle, and then with your knife very carefully you're going to push through those two slits, and you want to just push almost the entire knife just right through the leather. You're making two slit holes is the idea, and the slit holes are like that. Now once you've got the positions, you can use that to even just draw. If you can get your pen through there, you can then just cut them. Make sure they're not too big. You can always go slightly bigger if you need to, but they only need to be 5mm, so they only need to be the width of the prong. And then this is a bit like those paper fasteners that you might have had at school. You're going to push it through from this front side, so the prongs come through the back here, and then push the disc on top, and then bend your prongs back either side to give it security. Now this will leave a bit showing in your, once you've done those. So this is one I did earlier with it bent back, and that's how it looks from the front. So we had a little piece of that suede that we had cut off the top. If you take a little oval shape that's bigger than this, so I'm just going to cut it with a pair of scissors. I'm just going to lay it over and give you a rough idea how to do that. So you want something kind of that sort of shape, something that will cover over that and have a little bit of room around either side, because you won't be able to glue to the metal. So then glue that down in place, and if you glue it carefully and press it down, it really will almost disappear in. You can just about see it on the camera there, but it blends in quite nicely. And that will be on the inside there as well on the back, so it's not going to show, but it's just to stop it catching and scratching any of the glasses. So if you get that part of your glasses case done, and then we're ready to put the magnet on the top of the fastening. Exactly the same principle, but you need to make sure that your top fastening, and on your pattern you'll again see where the dot is to go, and make your slits, and this needs to be on the top, on the outer part, so that when we fold it over they clip together and because it's on the facing, we're going to stitch down, it's not showing. So if you get this piece now put into your facing, and then we're ready to do the last bit of stitching. Now we're going to be working from the front of the leather. So we want to make a stitch mark from here, a groove. I think it will show. I've grooved from here up to here, and then here up to here, which is marked on the pattern. So you might want to just put your pattern again over, put a little dot with your scratch all through to transfer that marking, and then groove down and groove down that side and groove along this top, and then on your facing, face down along the top of the facing as well. So it's going to be like so. Once you've got your grooves in place, you then need to chisel them. So with the chisel, starting on the side, you're going to start from that top point there on that side and go down to where you can see that crease in the fold. Don't go too far. And then go from the bottom, and this time you want to be doing what we did before, which is to put the top of the chisel is going to be just over the edge of the leather, and then you're going to go down from there and go back as you're chiseling. You're going back into the last hole with the next one of the first ones, so that all your holes are even. So when you're doing your stitch holes, you're always working from one end, the top end that's going to be stitched, that's going to meet to the top end down, and that way your holes will always meet up. So we're going to do going down into the last hole each time. And I'm just going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I want 2 more. You want 12 on the inside piece and 11 on the other. And that's using the 88045 3mm chisel. It's called a 3mm chisel, but if you measure it from point to point, you get 5mm. So we fold those over now. We can start stitching, and that top hole there will become where we start doing our saddle stitch from. So there we have a little gap where they fold over. So get your chisel holes put in. Do the same for the top along here. Now when you come to do your facing, the best thing to do is to put your facing on underneath into place, and then use your awl and just mark through, right the way through, so that you can see on your facing that that first hole is one you're going to chisel across, so that when your facing have got your 2 wrong sides together, that all your holes are lined up and you're not slightly off center. So you're going to chisel the holes in here, put the facing on underneath, and then make sure it's all lined up in place, and then just pierce through the first one to get it to give you your first starting hole, so that when you turn that over and go to chisel them, you're starting from the right place. So to stitch up your sides and your facing, measure, I've got for the sides, I'm doing a fingertip to elbow times 2, and we're going to saddle stitch. We haven't got many stitch holes, as we said, it was 11, 12 to do each side. So thread your needles, reasonable tails, needle on each end, press down the wax thread around the needle, and you're going to start it through in the top hole. Pull your threads through, get them level each side, and then drop the back one, so you're just working to the top, loop it over and take it through the top hole at the back, and then that's going to go through the next hole down. So bear in mind, these first stitch you can't really pull tight, because unless you're grabbing hold of both of them, and just make sure that it's pulled tight so that it's sitting up at the top of that stitch groove rather than to one side. So just might need to position it to start it off. I'm pulling that tight from both of them, and then I'm going to drop that needle down, and I'm going to pick up the needle at the back, and I'm just going to tug over that thread to open up the hole so that I can go through, and I'm going to go back through that same hole that I've just come down from, but with the back thread this time. And once this is through, now we can lock that stitch tight. So now you can pull it tight and that'll be locked. Now these aren't particularly going to get much stress, so you can, if you want, do a stress stitch, which is just another round and come back where you end up starting from. You would definitely do that on the top of bags and seams and things which get pushed open a lot. Not going to worry on this one. So with that top needle, I'm going down a hole, but one hole further along, and coming out the back. I'm then dropping that thread, but I'm just going to pull it away so that it opens up the hole, ready for this needle that's on the back to be pushed through and come out of the same. And now again, I've got a needle and thread either side equal, and I'm going to pull it tight, and I'm ready to carry on. So on the front I'm going down one, pull it tight and away. On the back I'm picking it up and coming through the front, and carry on stitching like that. Top needle down, one, pull that down and away, back needle through that same hole, down one, and pull either side. My sewing face on. Now when you get right down to the bottom and you've done your last stitch, the way that you tie your threads off and get them back is to go back up one stitch, and you're going to push the needle through the hole, but instead of going all the way through front to back, you're going to push it so that it comes out on the inside of the two layers. So push the needle through, mind your fingers, take that thread through tight, and do the same with the other needle. So turn it over, find that hole, and pull that needle through. Now again, belt and braces you can tie off here if you want, but these will be secured inside here now, and then you can trim those threads inside right into that corner, and so they can disappear. The advantage of using this wax thread is it pulls all the stitches tight and locks in together. So I probably would just put one small knot in and then trim. It depends on what's going to happen. I don't think that's going to go anywhere, so that will be safe to trim off it once those are pulled through into the inside seam. Those a little snip and away, and there we have our neat stitched seam. And the advantage of using saddle stitches, we're getting a nice neat stitch on either side, because particularly with this item we're seeing both sides. So go ahead and finish your other side and sew on your facing in place, making sure you've already put your magnet on. So this is the finished one. You have your little nose bar inside. You have your stitching done. Now the leather that you've got for this in many cases is firm calf, and some of the firm calf aren't dyed all the way through. So what you might notice is that you've got a grey piece of leather on your cut edges. So you can edge treat that. One of the easiest ways to edge treat it is to just almost recolor that line. If you want something simple, you can just use almost like a Sharpie or something like that, and then a light wax and slick into the wax with the edge of the bone folder, like so. And that will just give you a light finish. It can look really smart though to do a really nice finish on these. So you could use the leading edge, would be perfect for this. These are mineral tan leathers, so they won't work with gum tragacanth and traditional slicking. They do need a different method. Plus you also have got a lining here which can interfere. So what I would do with this is, you've got nice clean edges from your cuts. If you've got anything that's a bit jagged, maybe use the sandpaper to just take that jag off, and then edge foundation and use an edge paint. And this can be a really fun way to customize again and use an interesting color, or use the brown and just cover over, and you'll get one of those. So the edge paints give you that kind of look that you get with like fashion bags and things. You get that nice kind of thick glossy edge. So those are the leading edge. They're available on the website, and that's how you would edge finish it. You can either do it simply, a little bit of dye colour and a light wax and slick into it, or go for it and do a little bit more of an elaborate finish and detailed finish. It kind of depends on the look you're going for, and you know what you want to do as to which method you go for. And it may be that you've been one of the lucky people that had something dyed through, and you can literally just do a light wax on it. So if you happen to have this leather, which is the oil tan calf, it's dyed through, so you've got a brown edge. So you can just literally go straight to putting a light wax on there and just slick. It doesn't need anything else really putting on it. These leathers are, the firm calf are already finished. They don't need any more finish on. That will be fine as it is. With this one, it can be really nice to just give it a bit of a cream up with some Canuba cream or the light Veg Protect wax, and just give it a little bit of a buff, and it just really brings out the patina. But the oils that are in this will just get better the more it's handled and the more it's used, and will give it will sort of self-condition, if you like. So there's your glasses case. Just edge finishing this chrome tanned glasses case. So you can see here that it's got the pale grey on this front edge, and I want to make this a kind of contrast. For the camera as well, I'm going to use a turquoise so that it will show up. So just before I start, I'm just going to run my finger to feel that those edges are cut level. They're feeling quite true. I've just got one little area down here where it's not quite sitting nicely, so I'm just going to use a fine grit sandpaper and just bring those levels a little bit more evenly together. Just blow that dust away. I want to try and keep the area as dust free as possible at this point, because we don't want to have any little dust particles collecting into the edge paint. So what I've done is I've poured out a little dish of each of edge foundation and the edge paint into tattoo ink pots, which you could buy off eBay. This was a little trick sent in by one of our customers, Mark, really handy. It just helps. I'm using this edge roller which has these gills. You can use a paintbrush or a dauber, but with this particular method, with this edge roller, it's just really handy for popping in. So I'm just going to load up the edge roller with the edge foundation and just take it to the edge. I don't want it to go off, and then I'm always going to work in one direction. So I'm just going to roll. I'm going from my right to left. I'm not quite sure why I started that way. And I'm just going to put this on. Now this has several different functions. Not only does it seal this edge and smooth it, the fibres down, and help them bond, it acts as a bit of a filler when you've got several layers. So here we've got not just the facing and the case, but we've got a little bit of the lining as well. So I'm just very carefully and slowly rolling it on, always going in the same direction. And I like using these because they're very neat and you tend to avoid spillage. So now I have that. I always keep a cloth here just in case. I have those on. Now this is going to dry clear. Just going to make sure there's no particular bubbles. And look along it with light. So I now need that to leave that to dry. You can blast it off a little bit with some heat, but I prefer to let this dry naturally at this point. So this edge is now dry, and in the meantime I've cleaned my gills on my edge roller pen so that I'm ready to start anew. So I'm just going to give it a quick wipe as well, make sure it's dry. And I'm ready to put the first coat of the edge paint on. So if I put that onto there to make sure I don't spill any. And again, loading it up, just making sure you've not got any drips off that end. And starting from the same end, you just want to pop it on. Now this first coat, I tend to do 2 coats. And get a first thinner coat on first and then try and do a beaded coat. So I'm going to just, at the moment, just aim to get this lying nicely. And I'm not going to over worry if it's a little thin. Now sometimes you might notice when you're putting it on, and as it begins to dry back, you can get little air bubbles forming, and that tends to mean, because we shake the bottle before we put it on, you're shaking air into it, so you really need the bottle to settle before you pour it. Or if you're pouring it straight out into the dishes like we've done here, just before you start painting your edge coat on, what you want to do is just tap the dish a few times just to let the air bubbles come to the surface and burst in the dish rather than bursting onto the edge. So you can see there I've got my first coat on. It's not gone on too badly at all. I've got one little area here that I can see has got a little bubble, so I'm just going to roller over that. Keep turning it round into the light so you can kind of get a bit more of a feel for what's going on with it. Now with this one you can apply a little bit of heat to dry. These are based on the same principle that are used in bag making commercially, so they've just been taken into a craft solution. And one of the aspects of this that would be done in the factory is that they would have a heat area put over to seal and kind of just sort of almost melt that paint in a little bit to smooth it down. So I'm just going to go and give that a little blast. For the sake of this, I'm going to use a low, very, very low setting on my heat gun, just so that it's not too much blowing. You can use your hair dryer, but you want to keep it quite a distance away, so you're just creating a kind of warmed atmosphere rather than blowing in case the paint is loose. The other thing you can do is just pop it into a really low 50-degree warm oven just for 5 minutes, just to let that set. You don't want to damage the rest of the leather either, so if you can, leave it naturally and then just give it a little heat blast towards once it's already started to dry off. Now when these are dry, they will dry to a matte colour. If you want to have a gloss, then there is a gloss top finish, so you could go straight to that now, or if you want to neaten up your colour, you can put a second coat on and repeat the process. Now it's worth taking a look at this point. If you do have any of those little air bubbles that are formed and you've got little pockets that are looking a little bit irregular, you can go back to your very fine sandpaper and very, very lightly just go back over that edge, just to kind of almost give it a new key, and just to smooth out any little imperfections that may have arisen from bubbles. But as I say, if you tap that pot before you start, you should mitigate that happening. So I'm just going to put another coat on now. This time I'm going to be a little bit more, I'm just going to turn it to face me a bit better. I'm going to actually kind of try and bead up the colour. So what I want is to get a slightly rounded profile. So I'm just letting the paint drop on, and rather than rollering it in, I'm just letting it sit there a little bit on the top. And this is going to give me a really nice beaded edge, and it's really will have hidden all of my layers away, and it will have hidden that grey of the chrome. Now because I want to keep this suspension, this beaded edge, I am going to let that stand and dry off naturally. So I'm just going to again take my eye up it, just make sure you've got it looking right before you set it, but it's one of those things where don't play around with it too much. Just got a little bit on that edge that's not taking, so I'm just going to drop a bit more of the paint on there. Lovely, that's looking great. So I'm going to let that stand. I'm going to position it to dry in an upright position to let that beading just dry off. So if I wedge that there, and I will come back to that later. So that's how to finish off. It's worth just saying as well, if you're using these roller pens, go to them and wash them straight away, so don't let anything dry into the gills, because it gives you, these gills give you a really nice loading for without dripping, so you don't want to have those clogged. So I'm going to go straight away now and wash that. And another reason for using these little pots is you have a lot less wastage. If you were to pour this straight from the bottle top or try to dip in, you quite often get sediment and things around the neck of the bottle, and you can get little particles and things which will interfere with your finish. For this last project, we're just going to do a really simple, quick one, but it's just to practice setting a press stud. These are really useful little things to have for your cable ties. It's just literally a piece of leather with a press stud on it. You can make them to any shape. I've got one on the go that's going to be a leaf, little leaf one. You can make them so that they have a thicker back and then taper off that way, or just catch by putting some nicks across. So you'll have a little shape like a bit like this in the pack, but you can use it for any scraps. What you want to think about when you're setting a press stud is the thickness of the leather again. So it's a bit like riveting, about how much you've got packing it in. So I'm just going to fold this over, and I'm just using the same drive punch, size 1 for this one. I'm going to fold it over and get my holes going through so that my press stud will meet back and forward, and it will make everything sit neatly. So I'm going to put it through 2 layers. I'm just going to do this by eye, but you can mark off your centre by measuring. So I have my 2 holes in either end now ready. Now with the press studs, they come in 4 parts. So you have a little round dish. Woo! The press studs come in 4 parts. You have a little round dish like this sort of shape, and that is going to go with this rounded top part like that. So you have a kind of nice looking cap. So those 2 go together, and then you have the flat post like that, and you have a dish which has a flat surround like that, and those 2 go together. So we're going to start with the flat ones, and I'm going to push through. So you want to always be thinking which way they're going. So I'm going to push the post through so that it comes onto the inside. So we're always going to be setting on the inside and having our external bits. So the post has pushed through. Now you'll see I've got this much poking through because my leather is about 1.2 mil. I'm going to pop my dish on top. So it's just sitting on top, and you can see that little round post coming through the centre there. I'm going to take this one away. Now with this, you don't need the dish because this back part here is completely flat. So you're going to go straight onto the stone here, and you're going to pick up your setting tool, and keeping your fingers so that the dish, if you notice with the dish, if you move it with your fingers, you can see it's going a little bit side to side. So I'm just going to keep my fingers there, and then with my little finger here, I'm just going to hold that dish down and hold this upright. So again, it's about being upright. So again, it's 2-3 firm taps. It's not maybe quite as firm as the rivets, but firm enough. Now when you've done 2 or 3 firm taps, you can then rotate this. So you're going to kind of go like this as you're hitting. And what that does is that balls over the top part of the fastening, and that's now set in place. So you can see it's in the centre there, and that's all set. It's not going anywhere. You can feel it and feel it's tight. Now, if you're using any kind of thinner leather than this, you may need to pack out. These are line 20 press studs. They are really good. Anything up from about 1.2 to about 2.5 mil, they'll work really well. Anything a little bit thinner, you may need to create a facing so that they're going through 2 layers, or put a little disc of leather underneath in between those 2 layers just to give you a better compression. And now we're ready to do the other side. So we're going to pop in from the grain side, we're going to pop the dome shaped disc in, and this we will want to use our little dot anvil. So the dot anvil, I have a little bit of blue tack underneath to stop it sliding on my marble, which I'm going to stick down. And I'm going to keep an extra little bit of blue tack here and put a bit on the top of the dish so that I can actually pop that bit into the blue tack as well to keep it in the dish and keep it sort of from sliding. So I'm going to press it down a little bit because I want it still to have the firmness of the dish underneath. And then I'm going to put my little cap on the top of this post part. So that's just going to sit on there. Now again, if you wiggle that with your fingers, you can see that's kind of got a little bit of movement side to side. So same principle again. Pop the nubbin of the setting tool. So your line 20 setter has a little nubbin at the top, and that goes over and sits into the post. And this is why you need the right setter for the job, because that nubbin has to be sitting into the top of each post. Unfortunately, with press studs, a lot of the time people want to replace them on coats and jackets. It's sometimes companies will give you ones that match, and that's fine, but a lot of the time they make them in the factories. They just make thousands, and they have their own equipment with machines to set them, and it's not always possible to replace them without taking all of it out and then using one of these to do it with. So I'm just going to again hold my little finger against the little dish at the bottom there, just to keep it a bit steady. And again, it's several firm taps. Now you should be able to feel whether the dish is moving at this point. So I'm going to leave the post in place, but just move my little finger, and I can see that the dish is still turning a little bit. So it needs another little hit, but I'm going to angle. So lots of small hits as I'm kind of rotating. Let's take a look at that. And check it's not spinning. Nope. And now I should be able to press the two together, and I have a press stud. Okay, it can take a little bit of practice. So what can happen is that the dish can slide a little bit and sit not a bit off center. So just have a little practice, and again, it's a bit of a technique of just trying to keep that dish a little centered as you're pressing it down. Very useful. Anything that you want to be able to open, you can use them for belts to have that turn back like we did on the wrist cuff earlier. If you're doing that on a belt and you wanted to have interchangeable belt buckles for having different colours, make your belt last a bit longer, you can put press studs on rather than a permanent fixing. Anything with a belt loop, any other kind of fastening. I wouldn't use this on the glasses case because you've got to press and you don't want to be damaging the glasses inside, which is why we used a magnet fastening. But press studs are very handy and very handy to know how to set. So well done if you've got through those 3 projects. Love to see how you've got on and what you've made. So do send me your pictures in. I hope that's been useful to you and got you going a bit further on your leathercraft. If you've got any projects you want to make and you're not sure of the leathers to use, or you're not quite sure how to go about the project, do send us an email with your pictures of what you're trying to achieve, and we'll be happy to advise you. All of the tools, the finishes, the edge finishes, everything we've used today is all available on the website. And again, if you need any advice, please don't hesitate to ask. Thank you so much for joining.